Hello, everyone. Welcome to a Thursday edition of Weekend Waypoints, production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, going to take you through a preview of the final SEC regular season weekend. Believe it or not, the highway to Hoover is, we've just about reached the exit ramp on the highway to Hoover to actually get to Hoover. I will be headed that way on Monday ahead of Tuesday's games. A reminder on the top, Mark and I will have a SEC tournament preview live stream Monday evening. Time TBD. I'm flying in Monday. Kind of depends on my flight's on time, how long it takes me to get back to my hotel, et cetera, et cetera. But I will communicate that time a little more specifically once we get a little bit closer to that time. But I can guarantee it'll be Monday evening in place of our normal Sunday recap podcast. We typically do. Just didn't feel like there was any reason to do two separate episodes there. Instead, just do one big episode on Monday to preview the tournament. Before we get anything else, a quick note for Academy Sports and Outdoors, which is your new home for Jordan Brand. Gear up today and take flight. Make your play in the latest head-to-toe Jordan gear for the entire family, available in-store and at academy.com. Unleash your greatness with Jordan Brand, now at Academy. All right, you may wonder why. Hey, Joe, on a Thursday episode, why does the banner say Friday? Well, that's a good question. I forgot to ask the folks who do a wonderful job doing the design work on this stuff to make a Thursday banner this season. So the 2 weeks we've needed one, Easter and here, I've just gone with Friday. So that's the long and the short of that story. All right, got some comments waiting, so let's get into those first. Jeremy Scott says, roll tide. He said, we'll be in Hoover next week for the SEC tournament to see most of the games. Good on you, Jeremy. That's something, a couple things there. One is I've said this before, but I'll be interested to see what the attendance outside of, Bama and Auburn fans that maybe live in state, live in Birmingham specifically. I'll be interested to see what the turnout is for some other schools. Now, I think for the schools that have, are going to be in the top four and don't play until Thursday. What day is that? Thursday. Or whatever day it is, I don't worry about those teams. I think LSU fans will still show up as an example, but if your team is playing on Tuesday or Wednesday and there's no guarantee of moving on past that, how many folks are going to head on down that don't live in Birmingham or in Alabama more specifically? But there are a lot of SEC fans from a lot of other schools in Birmingham. That's a big SEC town. So, I'm not expecting it to be a ghost town or anything, but it will be interesting to watch. The other thing on that is that, Mark and I will be there all week, save for I'm going down to the Sun Belt in Montgomery one day. So there'll be one day I'm not in Hoover, but also going to pop over to the SWAC tournament at Rickwood Field in Birmingham, honestly, just because I would like to see a game at Rickwood. That's a cool experience, but Mark and I are doing that on a day, really Friday morning, when the SWAC has early games and the SEC doesn't have early games that day, so that won't affect our SEC coverage. But anyway, if you see me out and around, or Mark out and around in Hoover, feel free to say hello. I think a lot of people don't because they're afraid they're going to bother. They're afraid they're going to bother us. But no, like, unless you see us hustling off with our notebooks in hand, like we're headed to a press conference or something, for the most part, like, we're both happy to stop and say hello. So don't be shy if you see us, or if you're in line at the concession stand and you see us from far away, just, you can give a shout and a wave. That'll work too. But always happy to talk ball with you guys if I see you out somewhere. And I've, had that a lot this season where I've seen folks out and about and got a chance to say hello and say thank you for following the work we do, whether you're a subscriber or not, whether you subscribe or whether you just watch these videos, whatever it is, I'm thankful for it. So say hello if you get a chance. Caleb Falk with a few messages in here. Good morning, Caleb. He says TBA for Thursday against South Carolina. Yeah, that's probably, you want to keep the rotation now that we're have an eye towards the postseason. It makes a lot of sense. And I think we'll see this all over the league tonight where, wanting to keep guys on schedule. I think you may also see some starters today go short because if you're a team that feels like you need wins in Hoover for whatever reason, you could bring your Thursday guy back for Tuesday or Wednesday pretty reasonably. But either way, I'd expect to see a lot of midweek guys on Tuesday because obviously that's, how the schedule shakes out. But He says, Nude has looked good in SEC play. I'd like to see him continue to improve. Shores has been better out of the pen as of late also. Yeah, I think Shores is just – I think the bullpen is where he's just fits best because you can just kind of let his stuff work, you know. Caleb also says, starting to see a few more guys define certain roles out of the bullpen. Connor Williams has emerged as well. And then wouldn't hurt my feelings locking up a top seed this weekend, losing an SEC tournament to give our guys some rest for postseason play. I mean, yeah, that's you know, for the teams that have kind of locked up top eights, feel good about all that stuff. This week is really about stay healthy, and you don't hate going out early. Now, with the new format, the best teams aren't going to, even if they go all the way, aren't going to play that many games. So it's one of the things I like about this format. But even still, you don't mind losing early. But if you're going to lose early, you want to feel good about the way you played. Like you don't. And this is, some teams play terrible in Hoover and then go on to play great. But just to keep momentum going, like you don't want to. You don't want to be flat in Hoover because then you have to flip that switch back on for regionals, and teams can do that sometimes, but it is a hard thing to do, and you don't want to have to bank on it. And that's one of the things that teams have to balance as we head towards Hoover. Logan Crow says Cade being shove day. Max Ballou back in lineup. Obviously good news there for Texas. We'll see how that goes, and I would imagine they'll be very watchful with him and see how he looks, talk to him about how he feels, because yes, you do want to get him going before the postseason because you don't want him to just show up in day one of a regional and be like, all right, here you go. I know you haven't hit in 2 months or whatever it is. Go get him, Tiger. Like you don't want that. So you do want him to get some ABs under his belt before that. But at the same token, you also don't want to push him too hard now and then have him be in a situation in a regional where he's not feeling as good as he could. So, but that is big news, obviously. And then, of course, Logan says it's 10:48. No, you still sucks. On my way up to Norman now. Should be a fun weekend in Norman. Good rivalry series to end the regular season there. And Logan Crow says, great day to win the SEC. Yeah, that is on the table for Texas. And that would, I think, more or less lock up the number one overall seed. Yes, Texas has not played great as of late, but they did enough work, kind of like a golfer that, gets out to a four-shot lead and then goes into the clubhouse, and some other golfer comes up and cuts into his lead, but he still wins the tournament because he has a 2-shot lead, right? That's kind of feels like what's happening with Texas. Like, yes, they've had some bogeys on the last couple of holes, but they played well enough in the first 16 that it looks like they're still going to come in at the front of the pack, both in terms of SEC standings and in terms of seeding for the NCAA tournament. All right. Good question here from Jason Armstrong. What was the most surprising thing you heard when relating to the selection committee when J.R. Teagues jumped on the pod with the D1 crew? Well, since I was not on that podcast, Jason, I'll be honest with you, I've not heard it yet. They recorded that. Mark took my place on the main podcast because obviously Mark is the nerd master and the field of 64 guy. So I've not listened to it yet. I'm about to make a drive here. Got broadcasting some games up at Liberty this weekend against DBU, which DBU could be a 2 seed at an SEC regional. So I'm looking forward to seeing them, but I'm going to listen to it on that drive, and then I'll have a better answer as the weekend goes on, to be honest. So I'm glad you asked, because I wanted to make sure I want to make sure I communicate that I hadn't listened to it, but I will, and I'll have some takes later on in the weekend. Patrick Yankee says, I hope that Kentucky can take a game from Vandy this weekend. I'm really encouraged with the improvement of the UK freshmen, as well as multiple guys who could return next year. The future is bright. I totally agree, Patrick, on the future piece. Like, when you consider how good Tyler Bell has been, when you consider how good Schwartz has been of late, Nate Harris has taken a step forward. You've still got at least another year of Ben Cleaver. Does Kentucky? I think the future is pretty bright there. So yeah, I'm with you, and I think I think Kentucky is fine. I also, by the way, think Oklahoma is fine. Teams on 13 wins, but you win one this weekend, you feel better about it. So I understand wanting to see at least one more with for Kentucky over Vanderbilt, and I think if you made me bet, I think they get one this weekend. Vanderbilt's playing well, but also Vanderbilt probably also has one eye on getting things set up. They made some changes to their rotation this weekend, so we'll see. Jeremy Scott says, will one win for Alabama this weekend get them a host? It could, but if you're sitting on 16, you probably feel like you'd like to win the series. If they win the series, I think it's basically a no doubt kind of deal. I should also give the disclaimer of like, who knows? The committee's a different animal, and sometimes they break precedent, sometimes they're right in line with precedent. So I should always give that disclaimer of none of us can predict exactly what they will do. But they could host with one. That resume has done that before. 16 wins, top 10 RPI. I mean, Bama's sitting at 8 in the RPI, and with their series against Florida, who's sitting at 13 in the RPI, like that's not really going to hurt. It's a road series against the number 13 RPI team. The RPI is not going to get hurt, really. So, and it could get helped, right? If you win some of those road games. So yeah, one win this weekend for Bama might do it, but two would certainly make you feel a lot more comfortable. Logan Crow, and this is in reference to the J.R. Teagues interview, says, my biggest takeaway was that Jay wasn't a big RPI guy. Not sure if this is a shifting of the tides or if the different committee members weigh RPI differently. So I think it's more the latter, Logan, if I had to guess. And because we, haven't interviewed every single committee member, we'll never know. But I think there's something to the former, but I think it's more of the latter, where you could ask all the committee members individually, and I think they would give you a different answer on how they feel about RPI, what have you. But I do think there is something to, and look, J.R. Teagues being obviously a baseball guy. For those who don't know, he was a longtime head coach at Southeastern Louisiana and then elevated to AD after he, finished coaching there. But I think it helps that not only is he a baseball guy, but he was a baseball guy at a school where the RPI didn't always work for them. There were years where the RPI was good enough and they got in as an at-large when, them and Sam Houston were going back and forth in the Southland. But there were times where the team was good and the RPI just wasn't good enough. Or there were times where he saw firsthand Sam Houston was good and the RPI wasn't good enough. So I do think having a committee chair that understands that the RPI is a helpful tool sometimes, most times, but it is not the be all end all, I think is because of how it kind of punishes some things that are out of teams' control. I think is helpful from getting away from RPI. Like RPI is probably never going to get totally ditched like they did in basketball, but I do think it is positive that they brought in the KPI as another metric. DSR, which was developed by our friends at 643, is not an official metric yet, but hopefully it will be in the coming years. And I just think is much like with basketball, the more data points we can bring into the conversation, I think the better. Because it allows you to throw out outliers. Like what if there's a team that, I don't want to necessarily pick on a team, but I guess it should, like Oregon State's an example, like their RPI is 6, but that RPI is largely based on the fact that they played a bunch of road games and, they had to build a schedule as an independent. So I get it. And they did a good job doing that. Right. I think they've got a really good shot to host, but right now they're in a spot where if you look at RPI, they should be a top 8, right? Or at least in the conversation. But I don't think the resume is that good. It's not top 8 good. And oh, by the way, they went 0-4 against their best chance to make a statement against Oregon. And I was there. I saw it firsthand. So anyway, so what if their RPI is the outlier, right? So what if, and I don't know because I haven't looked at KPI or DSR today, and really haven't kept up with it as much as I do RPI. What if Oregon State's 6 in RPI, but significantly further back in the other metrics, right? Like that'll, because we have all of those metrics, you're allowed to say, okay, the RPI is clearly the outlier. But in the days when RPI was kind of the be all end all, we had no way of knowing that. And so that's why I like more metrics versus less. Logan also says he hinted they would probably add in a new metric next year. I assume he was referencing DSR. Yeah, I think so as well. I didn't want to be overly definitive about that, but I do know there is a lot of optimism about DSR getting added sooner rather than later. Cody Oates asks, how about Bama to get a top 8 seed, 2 wins versus UF, and how many wins in the SEC tournament? So 2 wins would give them 17 in the league. You'd probably need, I would say 2 would make you feel pretty comfortable at that, 2 wins in Hoover. Again, a series win against Florida and 1 win, or a sweep of Florida, which I don't predict because it's in Gainesville, but sweep of Florida, and then you may not have to do anything. But it feels like that. It feels like Alabama needs at least 3 more wins in some combination to be in the discussion for a top 8. 4 would make you feel pretty good about it. But it also, the top 8 starts to get crowded, right? Because, what if what if some other team that's not really in the mix right now, like what if Tennessee, I wouldn't predict it, but what if they sweep Arkansas and then win the SEC tournament, right? Like they go from a host bubble to a top 8. And so then they've lost a spot. Or what if, somebody outside the conference, right? Like what if UCLA wins the Big Ten, then wins the Big Ten tournament and gets wins over Oregon along the way? And it really helps their resume. Those are just random examples I pulled out of the air, but the top 8 does get crowded. Like by definition, there can only be 8 of them. People don't talk about that enough. Only get 8 top 8 seats. So these are all kind of moving targets. But yeah, 3 or 4 more wins in some combination for Alabama, I think at least gets you in the conversation in the committee room when it comes down to it. All right, if you have more questions, feel free to drop them in there, but I'm going to go through I will go through all of the series that we have this weekend here in a second. I'm going to take another sip of water. I have my dinosaur cup today. Shout out. It was a groomsman gift in a wedding I was in, a dear friend of mine. And honestly, a very useful groomsman gift. We can be honest about that, by the way. Most groomsmen's gifts are kind of useless. Not useless, but like, okay, great, whiskey stones. But like, am I really want to keep up with those? Or, like a rocks glass, which sure, if I'm having a little glass of whiskey or what have you, but I'm going to use a water glass or a pint glass in this case a lot more often. So anyway, that's my little tangent there, but enjoy my dinosaur cup from the wedding. Okay. Let's start with Tennessee, Arkansas. That's in terms of ranking, that is the most high profile series. And there's a lot on the line, especially for Tennessee. Tennessee's looking to host. They're suddenly, I don't even say suddenly, because I think we've all kind of seen this, kind of decline for them throughout the season, but sitting on 15 SEC wins, they're kind of in the same. They're frankly behind a team like Alabama just because of the RPI difference, right? They're kind of actually closer to Florida in terms of like in the teens RPI wise, probably need at least a series win to get into the discussion. That's kind of where I am with Tennessee. Again, also similar to Alabama, you get one win and you have 16 SEC wins. You've at least put yourself in position to be in position, as the phrase goes sometimes with a good week in Hoover. But that's what Tennessee's playing for. Phillips, Doyle, Coons is the rotation there for Tennessee. Arkansas is going with Root to start the series, then a TBA, and then Gage Wood on the mound there. Arkansas in really good position for a top 8. Just don't lose the series, right? Like, because then you start to give the committee reason to maybe look at your resume again. But I don't anticipate that. Even if they do lose a series, I think they're still in pretty good shape for a top 8. But don't quote me on that. We'll have to see where we end up at the end of the weekend. Bama and Florida, we talked a decent bit about that one. But we talked a lot about Bama in their resume, but don't overlook the Florida piece of this. Like Florida just feels like a team that's against all odds has figured a lot of stuff out. They're really thin on the position player side. They only have 10, 11, something like that, healthy position players. So it's kind of the same lineup every day. And if those guys aren't producing, that just is what it is. The pitching has its issues as well, but Liam Peterson is pitching like a true upper tier SEC starting pitcher. That's a little bit of a cheat code for Florida right now. Some of the bullpen guys are coming around. Jake Clemente has been great, but also, Luke McNeely's pitching better these days. Christian Rodriguez is pitching better these days. So that's all positive for Florida. And if they sweep, and again, you never want to bet on a sweep even at home, especially against a good team like Bama. But if you sweep and you're Florida, again, that's a 16-win SEC team. Historically, that puts you in that conversation to host. Again, wouldn't bet on it, but it is on the table. A&M and Georgia, the stakes are clear here for A&M. If you got to find a way to at least win the series, probably sweep, and that's tough on the road against a team as good as Georgia. But they can look to last year, and Florida needed a result at Foley Field against a really good Georgia team, and they got it done. And I think Florida last year versus Texas A&M this year is a little bit of a different deal, because Florida had been trending in the right direction for a while, whereas A&M has been a little more. They've had a lot of positives. Don't get me wrong; some great series wins for A&M. Their resume is actually pretty strong, just based on quality wins, but they've just been a little bit, up and down doesn't even do it justice. I mean, to get swept on your home field by Missouri and really by the end of the weekend, not being competitive with Missouri was just such a shock to the system. So anyway, the stakes are clear there. And then on the UGA side, they're tracking for a top 8, but I am kind of curious what the committee does with Georgia. Let's say they just win 2 of 3 against A&M, and they're 18-12 in the league, which is a great record. That would be top 8 worthy, but their RPI is 1. And the guys on the Nerdcast, if you listen to that, you heard this conversation, but the guys were having trouble with, what do we do with the fact that the teams that I think people have the most conviction in being the top teams in the SEC this year are, Texas, Arkansas, LSU, like that trio, but their RPIs are worse, not by a lot, but by a little, compared to Georgia, Auburn, and Vanderbilt, which are literally 1, 2, and 3 respectively in RPI. And so if you're Georgia and you're an 18-win SEC team, whether or not you do anything in Hoover, is the committee more likely to put you at 1 or 2? Or are they going to put you behind teams like Arkansas, LSU, Texas that maybe have better season-long track records? And that's one where it's like, are they going to lean on RPI or are they going to look at something else? So that's, to me, that's almost like a little bit of a canary in the coal mine for what RPI might mean later on. So if we get to Selection Monday and we see, Georgia sitting on the 1 overall line, number 1 overall, number 2 overall, something like that, that could be a hint that despite J.R. Teague's being a little bit skeptical of RPI, let's say, that they have mostly leaned on RPI. Whereas if they have Georgia, if they hold serve at home, but then they end up closer to like 6 in the top 8, that could be a suggestion that, hey, they're gonna go maybe push against RPI a little bit here. That's not a guarantee, but sometimes we can see early tea leaves in the selection show of how things are gonna go. Auburn and Ole Miss. Auburn kind of looking for a top 8. This series is pretty clear too. Auburn's looking for a top 8. Ole Miss looking to host. The winner of the series is going to feel pretty good about those things. Ole Miss currently sitting 18 in RPI. The tough part for them is even if they win this series and they've got 16 wins, their RPI will come up because Auburn's 2 in RPI, but they still are probably going to be in a situation where they're behind Alabama, given that Alabama has such a lead in RPI right now. So they do have a situation where they could get kind of log jammed in there. But you put yourself in position if you win the series. Same thing with Auburn being a top 8. Auburn's obviously a lock to host at this point, but can they lock down being a top 8 this weekend? That's what to watch for there. At Kentucky at Vanderbilt, we talked about Kentucky a little earlier in the show, but Kentucky's probably fine. Good RPI, good metrics relative to a lot of other, let's call them bubble teams, but you get one more win this weekend. It wouldn't hurt. It'll let you breathe a little bit easier and just let you breathe a little bit easier because maybe it insulates you from like the committee just being kind of wonky about those 13-win SEC teams, which at least the last several years have gotten in a lot more often than they used to. So you just want to make sure you don't get, I don't want to say made an example of, because that's not going to be the right thing, but you want to make sure you don't get victimized by a breaking of recent precedent that those high RPI 13-win SEC teams get in. They break precedent with that, it could hurt those teams. And so if you're Kentucky, you want to get off that 13-win line. So a win here would help that. Vanderbilt, obviously, they're a similar position to Georgia, where it's like really good RPI, gunning for a top 8, but are they in the top half of the top 8 or the bottom half of the top 8? Obviously this weekend will play a role in that. A slight shift in their rotation. Austin Nye, their usual Tuesday guy who's been awesome this season in that role, is pitching tonight, Thursday, followed by J.D. Thompson and Cody Bowker. Connor Fennell, weekend off from at least starting. Probably not the worst idea. Last 2 weekends have not gone as well as they had before, so this is an opportunity to kind of give him a rest, let him catch his breath a little bit, and then maybe be stronger coming back. And maybe he's a guy we see out of the chute for Vanderbilt in their SEC tournament run. Maybe that's part of this calculus also, but regardless, Vanderbilt clearly wants him to be at his best when they get to regionals, and resting him here, at least from a starting standpoint, is what they've landed on. LSU in South Carolina. LSU's got a chance to be the top overall seed too. I mean, look, you're going to be, even on the road, I think folks are going to be looking at this as a series that LSU could and maybe should sweep. That would get them 20 SEC wins. Right now, the only team that has 20 is Texas. And by the end of the weekend, Arkansas could have 20, right? So, but that's really the only team that's like imminently sitting, getting close to 20 is Arkansas with their 18. A lot of teams sitting on kind of, 16, 15, 16 wins, LSU at 17. So that they feel like maybe the LSU and Arkansas, maybe the two biggest challengers for that number one overall seed, unless, as I talked about earlier, the committee ends up just leaning on RPI again. And then we have to talk about Georgia, Auburn, et cetera, et cetera. For South Carolina, obviously it's they're just playing to like get themselves ready for the SEC tournament and see what happens there. But what's kind of overshadowed the on-field stuff is just the continued discussion about Paul Maneri's future. So he did an interview with Koki Riley of The Advocate, LSU's beat writer. Obviously, that's ahead of this series, LSU playing South Carolina, so it makes some sense from that standpoint. And Paul obviously has that LSU connection. And he said what he said before was he said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, I guess I forgot how hard it was to win college baseball games. And, he said on radio a few weeks ago that he was kind of unprepared for how difficult the SEC had gotten. And I appreciate his honesty. And that's one thing that Paul, to his credit, he's pretty honest. He'll tell you what he thinks and what he feels. And I would love to have more of that in college baseball and in sports in general from people in positions of power. But it is not necessarily helping the perception of him as a leader of this program moving forward. And we'll have to see. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about it. Does Paul decide to just say, you know what, I don't need this. My legacy is secure, which it is, by the way. I mean, there's a lot of talk of this hurting his legacy, and I guess, but also like this dude's won a national title. He won a bunch of games at LSU. He produced a bunch of big leaguers while he was there. Like, his legacy is fine. Don't forget what he did at Notre Dame, by the way. So, his legacy is fine. So he may just decide like, why do I need this? That wouldn't shock me at all. But that discussion has kind of overshadowed the rest of it for South Carolina. Mississippi State at Mizzou. Mizzou doing some different stuff in their rotation as well. No Sam Horn this weekend. No Will Libert, at least from a starting standpoint. Those are two guys coming off of Tommy John. So just wanting to be smart with them. He said, I get the sense that he hasn't said this, but I get the sense that, if they're available for an inning in a close game, the Mizzou has a chance to win. Like maybe that's, maybe we see them in that limited role just to maybe keep their arms fresh, but not going to be starting. And then those two guys are dangerous. If they both get held back and they're both available on Tuesday of the SEC tournament, like whoever ends up in that 9 spot against Mizzou, presumably in the 16 spot, is not going to have a fun time, even if you beat them, because Sam Horn is big time arm strength. Like, guy could be a big leaguer if he decides to go baseball instead of football. Like, could be a big leaguer. Will Libert was their top recruit in the class before last season, but he's dealt with injuries. And oh, by the way, Ian Losey is healthy, and Ian Losey is a guy who has SEC starting experience, and Tony Newbeck is healthy, and Tony Newbeck has SEC starting experience. So all of a sudden, like, Mizzou actually has, I mean, they don't have the depth of, I don't know, choose your high-end SEC team this year, but they didn't have any 4 of those guys for a long time this season. And a lot of when they were just getting beat up in the league was when they didn't have those 4 guys. Now, if they do, it's a different deal, right? So Mississippi State obviously can't, and they know this because they just watched Mizzou sweep A&M on the road. Like, Mississippi State can't just show up to Columbia and think they're going to, just run the bus over these guys. Like, you're going to have to play well. And then, but was what Mizzou did kind of a one-off? Did things just really come together? Was A&M just totally deflated after that Friday night heartbreaking loss where Mizzou scored 6 in the 9th inning? It could be. Like, Mizzou could go back to being more like the Mizzou we've seen earlier this season, but they sure did look a lot more dangerous last weekend. And the pitching, at least their top handful of guys, is real. And so not only this weekend, but again, that Tuesday of the SEC tournament, like they're just a different proposition than we thought they were going to be. And then Texas and Oklahoma, last but certainly not least, cool to have a rivalry series to end this regular season in the SEC. Oklahoma, much like Kentucky, I think is fine. 13 wins, strong RPI in the mid-20s. That's a resume that gets you in, tends to get you in. Got everybody in last year that was on 13 wins. Again, a win to get to 14 would make you feel better, but I think Oklahoma is fine. If Texas holds serve, as we talked about, they're the number one overall seed, I have to imagine. And it's just been a great season. Yes, the trend right now is not in a positive direction, but that doesn't erase the absolute dominance they showed in the league the first, whatever it was, 6-7 weeks of the season. That still counts. And they put in a lot of work early on to put themselves in that position. So kudos to them. As it was mentioned by a commenter, Cade Bing pitching tonight, Riojas tomorrow, Friday, Luke Harrison Saturday. Again, I think that's a move to keep Texas in order as we head towards the regionals. I think is probably what that is. And I do think there is the side benefit of like, let's see what Cade Bing looks like in the rotation, because he's a guy they've tried there and it hasn't necessarily gone their way, but a guy they like a lot, a guy who's certainly talented. Like, what if he's figured some things out? Like, suddenly Texas becomes that much better on the mound. They're not getting Jared Spencer back, obviously, but if Cade Bing can be a solid piece there and be a guy who's your third option in a regional, or if you get pushed to a game 3 in a super, if you get there, that's a pretty good piece to have. So I'll be watching that pretty closely tonight as well. All right, a handful of comments here. Let's get to these. And then we'll get y'all out of here, get you back to your Thursday. All right. Papa Dragon says, good time to get Coyle, Wood, and Dietz back. Yeah, it's from an Arkansas perspective, especially the Parker Coyle piece of it, because he was really good. And he gives Arkansas that lefty look that they just don't have a ton of outside of him. I mean, the rotation, they have Zach Root, obviously, and, Beidel Shees, depending on his role, but that just tough lefty look with really good stuff. They had Stone Hewlett last year, and he was a guy that helped out in that regard, but just they're a little bit short on that, especially with Coyle out. So that would be huge. Jonathan Singletary says, I think Newt gets the start today, but I also think it'll take a dozen runs to get the win. I mean, it might, but it is South Carolina's offense. And yes, they've had some moments like in game 2 of the Auburn series last weekend, but for the most part, their offense just hasn't, that hasn't been them this season. I guess I'll put it that way. Josh Carter, a couple good comments here. I'll do this one first. If 40-13 and 15-12 in conference, which is what Tennessee sits at right now, is a down year for Tennessee, we are in phenomenal shape as a program. Yes, full stop. Phenomenal shape as a program, right up there with pick your heavyweight in the league in terms of being positioned for the future. So 100%. Before we go any further, you're exactly right about that. And then you got if Tennessee pulls off the series win this week and all of a sudden they have the same amount of series wins and losses as Arkansas, the narrative of Tennessee's demise is grossly overrated. I would generally agree that things are not as bad. It's just that the losses occurred in the order they did, right? Where we thought Tennessee might be the number 1 team in the nation. And, who knows? We might get to Omaha and find out that was the case. But for right now, it's not the case. But early in the season, we thought, this is another Tennessee juggernaut team. And it's fallen off from there. So that's one thing. It's just the order in which the season happened. Like anytime you're fading down the stretch, at least in perception, that's going to be seen more negatively, I think, sometimes in the reverse. The other thing is that Tennessee's problems have been particularly acute. I think sometimes teams get picked on is not the right word, but people seize on a team playing poorly when the problems are easy to point out. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes a team's losing games and you're just like, I don't know what the problem is here, et cetera, et cetera. But with Tennessee, it's like, well, okay, you're getting run all over defensively, so a bunch of stolen bases. Also, your bullpen is just not as stout or as deep as it's been. And so because even casual fans can kind of point at those things, I do think it opens up a team a little more to criticism because the critics feel confident in their ability to diagnose, right? So I think there's a couple things happening there. But I agree with your larger sentiment, Josh. Like, if they win the series against Arkansas, like, yeah, your resume is not really any different, right? And that would be very SEC this year for that to happen, by the way, where it's just been like week to week, who knows? Like it's felt like a big league season. I said that on one of the podcasts I was on this week, where it's just like, in the big leagues, yes, you've got like the Rockies are obviously awful this year. The White Sox last year were awful. But most teams, even bad ones, like, if the Angels, and the Angels, I guess, are a little better this year, but, if last year's Angels win a series against, last year's Dodgers, we're like, oh, weird. And then we just move on and it's like, it'll be fine. But in college baseball, because it's a smaller sample, we react out. We have like outsized reactions to series results. And again, because it's a smaller sample, I get that. But this year has felt more like a big league season where, like, Tennessee and Arkansas and even LSU have taken some series losses that look kind of weird. And we're like, that doesn't track with what I thought this team was. But then the very next week, it's fine. And the team just snaps out of it. And so that's been a lot of this year. And not having a juggernaut, right? We thought it might be early in the season, maybe it's Tennessee, maybe it's Arkansas, maybe it's LSU. And then those teams took series losses. And then it was clearly Texas. And now Texas is headed in the wrong direction, at least leading up to this weekend. So there just hasn't been that one team that's gone wire to wire that sometimes we get enamored with. And so it's been fun because it's really unpredictable. Josh Carter also says, having said that, our fundamental baseball is really bad and it's annoying. We can't fix it. Is that on Tony or the players? Well, I mean, it's a little bit both, right? Because, Tony is recruiting the players and putting them together. But I just think you've got like a little bit of mismatch on defensively, where you've got, you're playing Andrew Fisher every day, who's not a fluid defensive player anywhere. And you had to move Dean Curley off a shortstop. And you've got Gavin Keelan, who is a good shortstop, but he's not, not a premium shortstop, or else he probably would have been there from the start. And your best defensive player is Ariel Antigua, but he doesn't have the bat you're looking for day to day. So, it's just like, you got Hunter Inslee in center field, who's excellent and you have no concerns about, but everywhere else, you're not really looking at a lot of premium defensive players. And so I do think it is on the players. So insofar as they are just not a premium defensive group. And I think it was easy to get kind of used to, even a guy like Blake Burke. I mean, Blake Burke was so much better defensively last year. And so we could also see a jump. Now, not for the draft eligible guys because they'll be gone, but among the younger guys, it wouldn't be a shock to see some jumps being made year over year defensively, and them being better in that regard next year. Sven Kreuzberg says, Hail State, let's see if we can do better as the media overhyped Aggies against Mizzou. Some of these experts should simply quit their job. I mean, I guess. Although I would remind you, like, I think about this all the time. Like, yes, like clearly as a media contingent, now we couldn't have predicted the injuries, but even without the injuries, it's clear that A&M was not going to be the team we thought they would be. So that is on us. Like, we were wrong about that, but it's not just our job to rank teams, like, yes, we want our rankings to be accurate. Nobody does that and wants to be wrong. But like, our jobs are to like just analyze what's happening. And sometimes we're wrong and sometimes we're right. And we write stories about it. And our jobs are to write good stories and make interesting podcasts and make interesting videos. So yeah, we're going to be wrong, but our job is not, we're not professional gamblers. Our job is not to make predictions. It's part of our job, but I don't see it as a primary part of my job. Now, that's not me trying to shove off that accusation. Like, yeah, I was wrong about A&M too, just like everybody else. But I prefer to be wrong about stuff sometimes, because that means it's interesting. It's no fun if you kind of know how everything's going to happen. I mean, yes, it would make me look smart, but like, it wouldn't be any fun if we knew exactly how it was going to play out. So, I welcome it, frankly. It's made this season a lot more interesting. That's for sure. And we go into the postseason, by the way, without like, are there 6, 7, 8 SEC teams where you said if that team's the last one standing in Omaha, you wouldn't be shocked? Like, I think that might be the case this year. And all right, as if on cue, Joe, is this the most wide open tournament you can recall since the 2016 Coastal Championship? I think so. Like, there's certainly no definitive favorite. I think there's a lot of reasonable answers for that. Yeah, I mean, Arkansas, LSU, Texas, just given what they've done. If Tennessee gets hot, like, they might be the most talented roster in the country. So if Tennessee gets hot, let's not forget Florida State. They might have the best rotation. There are a bunch of different answers depending on what you've got. North Carolina from the ACC. So there's a couple teams in that league, I think, that are in this mix. So yeah, it is extremely wide open. I don't have, I don't really have a strong conviction on who the favorite should be necessarily as I try to rack my brain to think of it. But yeah, I mean, it's wide open and it's just gonna be a lot of fun, honestly. All right, Joey. Once again, I'm begging Tennessee not to stack base runners, steals, and errors. Yeah, that's a tough combination. Like if you're putting runners on base and then you're having trouble throwing them out, and then you're making errors like that, that's just you could be, whatever the best big league offense is this season. I guess you'd be the Dodgers lineup, and that would be hard to win games that way. Yeah. So fair enough, Joey. I can understand how that's frustrating. Sven, I see your comment about you meaning more the ESPN SEC network guys. Like, yeah, I get it. I understand. And I understand the critique, right? Like that was a big miss for us with A&M. So I'll be interested to see what State does this weekend against Mizzou. Is Mizzou, do they pick up where they left off, or does it turn out that was a one weekend thing? I could see it either way. All right, folks, that is going to do it for this edition of Weekend Waypoints, production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Another 40-plus minute episode, but hey, it's that time of year. I don't mind. So looking forward to the baseball this weekend. Looking forward to being in Hoover. Should be a heck of a lot of fun. So let's leave it there. I'll be back tomorrow morning to recap Thursday's action around the SEC, and I'll talk to y'all then. Have a good one. Enjoy the baseball.